I've had the 100% rule come up in conversations with my students several times recently, so I thought it might be time to make it the subject of one of our Next Step Musicianship videos. Next Step musicians are always looking to improve their music, and this rule will help improve their songs on stage. A lot. This 100% rule has been around a long time. It didn't originate with me. I first learned about it when I was attending a Maranatha music workshop in the late 90s. But it's always true. It's one of those evergreen musical principles that you can embrace or ignore as you choose. But if you ignore it, you do so with the understanding that your band's performance probably won't sound very good. At least not as good as it could be. Here's what this is all about. Whenever you step on stage with an ensemble, maybe it's your band or really any ensemble of any size, count the number of musicians playing together and divide the whole sound, that is 100% of the sound produced, by that number. That's how much of the total sound each musician is responsible for. So if there are 6 of you playing a song, each of you is responsible for 1/6 of the total sound. Well, that sounds reasonable, it sounds logical, but it's not as easy to achieve as you might think. If, for instance, you've got a player who really likes to be heard, they're probably going to overplay and cover other parts up. Likewise, if you have a musician who is tentative as they play, they probably aren't going to be heard enough. But for the sake of our discussion today, let's leave egos and temperaments out of it and just consider the instrumentation itself. Each instrument or voice needs to be in its own unique aural space in order to contribute adequately to the whole sound. Some instruments, like the drum kit for instance, will be pretty easily heard because of its unique sound that's spread across a fairly wide frequency range. But what if there were competition for that range? What if someone else in the band picked up a mic and started beatboxing? How easy would it be to distinguish one from the other? Now, that's an example that might not happen too often, but there are other instruments that often do compete for audible space. But unless that person responsible for arranging the songs is on top of things, those instruments will combine to create a thick, muddy, confused sound that negates any nuance. Take, for example, the bass and the keyboard. Now, your first thought might be, how could those two possibly conflict? But think about the keyboard player's left hand. They're playing a bass line of sorts, along with everything else they're playing. And if you've got a bass line from the keyboard and a bass line from the bass, unless they're exactly the same, they're going to compete with each other for the same aural space. And no one wins, it just sounds bad. Another example, the chords the keyboard player is laying down will usually be right in the middle of the frequency spectrum we're listening to. And who else is in that same frequency range? You guessed it, the rhythm guitar. So how do we get around this one? Suggest to your players that they use different techniques. For example, if the keyboard is playing block chords, rhythmically playing all the notes in the chord at once, the last thing you want your rhythm guitar doing is strumming. It's a different instrument, but you're effectively doing the same thing. And the sound will be thick, confused, not artistic at all. So instead, have the rhythm guitar pick individual strings as the progression is played. Or they could play accent chords on each chord change. Now, when you want to have the guitar strum, great, but have the keyboard play broken chords, 1 or 2 notes at a time, so it won't compete. Maybe go up an octave. Get out of that same range. Or the keyboard can play accent chords on every chord change. You can always have those two players take turns in the song itself too. Maybe the first verse is the time for the acoustic guitar to shine, so have your keyboard player lay out. Second verse, reverse it and have the keyboard carry the song while the rhythm guitar stays out. There are any number of strategies to use. Go into each song with a plan and it'll come out sounding good. If you don't have a plan, your song may end up sounding more confused, even chaotic. Now, along the same lines, be careful to plan for the role of the lead guitar, any leads played by the keyboard, and any orchestral instrument you might have, like flute, sax, trumpet, violin. Make sure when one is playing a lead line, whether it's a fill or a solo, no one else is playing at the same time. Then you've just got to make sure everyone who wants to play a lead line gets the chance. And of course, all the instrumental lead lines need to stay out of the way of the lead vocal. So that's the 100% rule. It's really not hard to implement once you get going. You'll want to think through each song's arrangement before you get to rehearsal though. Show up with a plan, explain to everyone what you're doing, and in the long run, you'll be able to make these decisions on the fly. But at first, it's worth putting some thought into the music before everyone's starting to play. With a little planning, your music will sound so much more intentional, and you'll be taking your craft to the next level. Have fun experimenting with it, and listen as your music takes on a new level of sophistication. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.